everybody, Pete from the GenWell Project here. I think it's Thursday, and we're back for another connected conversation, a conversation that's part of the GenWell Project, the human connection movement that was started in 2016, in an effort to remind people about the importance of human connection in our lives and inspire us all to take action. We launched it in 2016 because we knew that people go through ups and downs throughout the course of their lives, and by having people around them and building that community, that we can help everybody build the resilience, build the coping strategies, and build the solutions that will help us get us through it in the best way possible. Connected Conversation is a series of conversations that we launched at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in order to connect us with people, ideas, and tools that can help us all get through these times in the best way possible. A huge shout out to our volunteers who have helped us and continue to help us spread this message across Canada and around the world, and to people who help us facilitate things like our Connected Conversation series. Without them, none of this stuff could happen, and we can't build the human connection movement the way we all need to. And a big shout out to JP Wisers, our official partner, who helps us spread the message, both in the work that they do internally with their staff, but also through the consumers across this country who connect with the messages that they share about Let's Get Connected. I'm very excited about the conversation today. A good friend of mine, Yvonne Heath, we've only known each other a short period of time, but in a very short period of time, we recognize how aligned our messages are and the importance of each other's messages as synergistic to, helping people cope, manage through challenging times, and build the resilience that makes us all happier and healthier in the long run. Let me do a formal introduction before I bring Yvonne on. Yvonne was a registered nurse since 1988, and she worked in 10 different hospitals in the United States and Canada in many areas, including emergency, intensive care, the delivery room, chemotherapy, and hospice. If that isn't a journey that we can all be amazed at, I don't know what is. At the age of 50, she took a leap of faith, left her nursing career, and blazed a new trail to help create a culture of change. Yvonne shares her message with heart and humor, using intelligence, empathy, and a genuine uplifting spirit to combine a powerful mix of personal insights and lessons to demonstrate how we can live well and transform our world into a happier and healthier place. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to invite and thank Yvonne Heath, the founder of Love Your Life to Death, and also of the I Just Showed Up movement, onto Connected Conversations.
Woohoo!
How's that for an introduction?
Loved it. Thank you, Pete. It's so awesome to be here. And we haven't known each other long, but we're like kindred spirits. It's like we've known each other forever.
Yeah, everything that I've watched in regards to the work you do with Love Your Life to Death and the I Just Showed Up movement is so aligned in what we at the GenWell Project are about, which is human connection. But I love that you have related it back to the experiences that you had as a registered nurse, because I think that's really powerful. And I think for all of us, the lived experience, whether it's as the patient or as the person who's in every one of those experiences, I think that's the power of how this all happens, that we become passionate about something in our lives and say, hey, I think I can make a difference. And, this is what I'm going to do.
Absolutely. And just looking back, it's hard to believe that I was a nurse for 27 years. And when you're in it and, you feel like you're suffering excessively, which I say my goal is to help eliminate excessive suffering that we create. And a lot of that excessive suffering is by lack of real connection, actually. And it just feels so good to look back at that experience and be able to create something positive from it. So I'm grateful for all of it. I really am.
Honestly, you inspire. I swear to God, when I listen to you, I get so inspired. So let's stop for a second, because we always start out our Connected Conversation series with one question, and that's, how are you doing in COVID-19, because I think it's easy for us, whether you want to call ourselves the caregivers, the helpers, the kindness people, at the end of the day, what you do each and every day is try to support other people through your message. But I think it's really critical for us to put the oxygen mask on ourselves. And I want to check in with you. So here we are, 7 and I think a half months into COVID-19. And I just want to say, hey, Yvonne, how are you doing?
Pete, don't make me cry already.
Do you know? There's no crying here.
There's no crying here. No, thank you for asking, because it is so true. Sometimes when you're people call me the grief expert, which I kind of laugh. I say, well, I guess I'm a really good crier. I don't know. I don't ever feel like we're an expert, because no matter what we are passionate about, no matter what message we are sharing, at the end of the day, we're still human. And this pandemic isn't happening over here and I'm not in it. I'm in it too. And so thank you. I have been very, very intentional about checking in with myself mentally, physically, emotionally, and often dropping the ball as well. And that's just, being human, being honest. It's been challenging in many ways. Lots of wonderful events canceled, children going to school that have one class, which is, challenging, and they can't really socialize with their friends, and everyone's wearing a mask and you can't really see people smile. I desperately miss hugging. And it's a roller coaster. I, for the most part, am ridiculously grateful, because this pandemic that literally affects every person in the world, for some of us, it's disappointment and, inconvenience. For others, it's devastation. And that's the spectrum. So for us, it's disappointment and inconvenience. And I am very grateful for that. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's easy. So for the most part, doing great. And conversations like this light me up. So this makes my day. And so I'm intentional about creating these connections.
Yeah. And thank you for the honesty of that answer. And I was listening to your podcast this morning as we were talking about just before we came on air. And I know the first tip that you were giving of your 10 tips for people on managing through COVID-19 is it's okay to not be okay.
Acknowledge and allow all feelings, yours and other people's.
And I think, I certainly have been through the ups and downs. I don't think there's a person I've spoken to in the last few months who hasn't gone through ups and downs. And one person jokingly said, hey, Pete, at the start of this, I used to have good days and bad days. Now I have good hours and bad hours. And I think that's an interesting take on just how quickly things are changing.
It's a roller coaster. It is a roller coaster. If people told me, oh, I'm totally fine, there's nothing wrong, I think, I would be more concerned. I would be more concerned. It's like, this isn't affecting you at all, really?
Yeah.
Really?
But again, that's the tough part for a lot of people. We lived in such a world built on facades and on, the human highlight reel of social media, and just giving people the opportunity to now be open and be real and vulnerable, I think is so powerful, because we are going through this together. And I think that just gives a whole different experience versus when you lose a job. And we'll talk about challenges and dealing with grief with individual type challenges later. But I think there is something special about going through a pandemic together.
Well, I think that it truly, first of all, talk about shining a light on the importance of human connection. When you can't physically connect as you took for granted before, I just, one of the things I hold on to is I just hold on to the thought of, wait until we can have those hugs. Imagine what they're going to feel like. It's going to be like, okay, thank you. Can you let go? It's like, just give me one more minute, right? Yeah. Like, I am sorry, anybody, like, if you don't want to
hug me, if you hug me in the first month, please beware,
Yeah, like, and there's opportunity, and this pandemic is showing us wow, these things are important. Like, how much you miss them, how much you miss that connection. Sometimes you have to not have something that you took for granted. And, as much as people say they're tired of being online and imagine not being able to do this. I mean, I'm so grateful. We're having a conversation. I'm in Muskoka. You're in Toronto. I mean, how extraordinary for us to be able to connect this way. Wow.
Yeah. I've often said over the course of the last several months that I think the pandemic has actually woken us up to the goodness that technology can bring, because many of us were using technology for what Silicon Valley refers to as the unintended consequences, instead of what we spoke about when technology first started to really make advances. I have a deaf sister, and the opportunity to connect on FaceTime with a deaf sister was amazing. The ability to connect with people on the other side of the world. All these things were highlighted in books and TED Talks and movies and all the experts. But what were we using it for the most part, was actually distracting ourselves and creating that pressure in our lives. So in a way, again, another silver lining from COVID-19 is that we might actually be using technology for what it was originally built and intended for, and certainly sold in as, which was a great opportunity for us to stay connected.
Absolutely. I mean, in-person connection is always best. And I say to people, we need to grieve when we can't do that. And then ask the very important question, now what? What can we do? These are the things we can't do. Acknowledge and allow your feelings. Yes, it's very frustrating. And now what? What can we do? But back to your whole silver thing. Yes, speaking of silver, COVID, there was also a whole big movement of women not dyeing their hair anymore because they couldn't. And it's funny because I dyed my hair at home. And I mean, you kind of get on automatic pilot with things. I mean, I was a blonde forever, well, sometimes brunette, depending on the shade and my mood. And then I was at home and I wasn't doing in-person presentations. And I thought, well, this is kind of a good opportunity to test out the gray. I mean, that's a big deal when you've just done it forever.
Yeah.
And so I did it. I was at home by myself, and at first you're kind of like, ooh, I don't know. This is, whoa. And now I love it.
Well, and isn't the funny thing, Yvonne, I'm sure you've noticed that everybody addresses you completely differently now that you're gray, right? Nobody, it's all completely different. It's like, oh, actually nobody cared. They still think I'm beautiful and kind and generous and all those wonderful things. And I think that's, as you say, that's another silver lining. We're waking up that, so, it really isn't all about the color of my hair or the way I dress. And,
it's very freeing.
It's been 8 months of jeans and sweatpants for me. So
absolutely. Yeah.
And my dry cleaning bill is much lower too.
All business at the top, and then the bottom part is,
I put on my love t-shirt for you today. I don't even do the business on the top at this point.
Love it. Yeah. What's not to love about that?
All right. You and I could talk forever, but what I really want to do is get into some conversations here. So first off, so you're nearly a 30-year nurse. You've dealt with, from your bio, just about every crisis in the world. But something happened. Something happened in your heart, in your head, in your experience. Something happened that made you want to make a shift. And I really want to ask you to help us understand what shifted in you and what led you to love your life to death and, just be there. Sorry. Oh my God.
I just showed up.
I would just be there. I just showed up.
You were getting there.
Something switched in you. And I just want to understand that. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more.
Absolutely. It's interesting because sometimes it's, it's like the straw, right? The straw that broke the camel's back, that whole thing. But throughout my nursing career, no matter where I worked, in the States, in Canada, in the chemotherapy, wherever I worked, there was just kind of something in the background sort of missing, something we weren't doing quite good enough. And I couldn't put my finger on it. And I just kept changing departments, and which now gave me this tremendous experience. But no matter where I was, it was kind of the same. There was something gnawing at me. And then I worked in chemotherapy for 14 years. And, you know, I saw the very sort of opposite scenarios where over here, a family with, you know, maybe a prognosis, someone was young and they were dying. We were giving them chemo and they were not going to survive. They had cancer and it was very challenging. And yet this family over here was able to acknowledge and allow their emotions and laugh and cry and really connect, that human connection at a very deep level. And although the person died, the family was able to move through their grief with greater, not ease, but, you know, it was more gentle, and the person died supported and loved. And we as healthcare professionals grieved, but felt that, you know, we did the best we could. We really connected with that person. And then you had the family over here, perhaps the same scenario, but everyone was angry and bitter and no one was really connecting or talking or having real conversations. And they were having chemo right till their dying day, and everyone was angry and bitter. And that person died in fear, and that family left and they were just trapped in their grief, and we suffered excessively. And I just said, here's, you know, two scenarios, and what changes, what makes it so different, and how can we have more of these scenarios? And and of course, as a healthcare professional, I suffered excessively watching these and not really knowing what to do. And then 10 years ago, when our older son, so that's professional, right? There's professional grief and disconnection. And then 10 years ago, when our son had tremendous grief in his life, different things happened, and he went down a very dangerous road of drugs and addiction. And I realized how isolated I was, because people were scared to death to talk to me because the situation was so uncomfortable. And once again, I felt very disconnected. I couldn't reach my son. I tried, and people were not. People are compassionate, but often when they don't know what to do, they don't know what to say, they avoid when you need them most, when you need that connection most. And in that moment, I felt so isolated and alone. And I also felt like I would not survive a tragic ending here. And now I have 2 other little kids. And what do I do? And I can't believe that the people that I thought would be there for me, they're terrified. They don't know how to connect with me. And so they're avoiding me. And so there was all this tremendous grief that was just so heavy. And my heart felt broken in a million pieces. So it was either do something different or stay the same and suffer. And that was the catapult. And so I just, you know, became more anxious, and I need to do something different. And I went on for a few years, and, you know, I always share that my hero was, after I watched the movie Patch Adams, Robin Williams, who lives in my heart. And I was very funny. As you know, I'm funny, right, Pete? Like, and I still kept trying, you know, to bring in the humor, and it wasn't enough. I needed more. So finally, I just became more and more anxious, and I just said, I need to do something different. And that's when there was a pop-up on Facebook, how to write a best-selling book. And it was like my moment. Oh my gosh, honey, that's it. I'm going to leave my 27-year nursing career and write a book. Oh, isn't that great? And
he thought you were joking.
Oh, I was joking.
Honey, that's very funny.
He's like, yeah, but, you know, like, you don't write. I said, I know. Isn't it fantastic? I was like, I became that cookie out in the forest. And you want to know why, Pete? Because I sent out one email and I said, again, I do not want surveys and statistics. I'm going to write a book. I want people's real stories, real, gritty, deep in the trenches of grief and connection, and what helped you get through to the other side. And people, I said, will anyone share their stories? 5 years later, the stories haven't stopped coming. And I literally connected, talk about connection, sitting there listening for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to people's most vulnerable, personal, hard, challenging stories of life, grief, happiness, joy, just all this whole big messiness, crying, laughing, hugging. It was extraordinary. It was beautiful, and it changed my life. And that's the realness of it all, right? That's where it really counts. And I feel such a bond with every one of those people to this day. It was incredible.
I think it's so powerful, and to be honest with you, emotional. I was actually getting choked up listening to you and listening to the struggles and challenges that you went through, both professionally and on a personal level. But I think, isn't it that some of if it doesn't kill us, it makes us stronger. And it seems like what it's done is really made you a champion and made you an ambassador for, better coping strategies, which, as you and I will both agree, everything that you've talked about, whether it's your son, I know they say that the opposite of addiction is human connection, whether it's grief, and it's building those strategies beforehand, which we'll delve into a little bit more, but making sure that people have that support community around them before they get to the grief. Even the launch of the Gen Well project, I did have somebody reach out to me at the start of COVID, and they said, "Pete, how did you know?" And I said, "How did I know what?" They said, "How did you know that we were going to need, human connection more than ever?" I said, "I didn't know there was a pandemic, but what I knew was that people go through crisis in their homes behind their own four walls by themselves every day. And if we're not conscious about it, then how are we expected to help people when we don't even recognize the value of reaching out to one another?"
Oh my, you see, this is why I just love us connecting so much, because that is truly all of it. And the biggest message that I've realized and share is that people are so afraid to do or say the wrong thing, and they don't feel qualified, right? Oh, we need to, like Yvonne's son he's going through these addictions. He's has a therapist, or they have addiction outreach helping, they're good. It's like, well, even if you do need a professional, your grief, your struggle, your crisis is 24/7. I mean, 1 hour of therapy or whatever is helping you professionally is not going to cut it. You need your village. And the good news, everybody listen, it's not your job to fix it.
Yeah.
But connecting with someone, caring, saying, I don't know what to say, but I'm here. Little act of kindness, little reaching out, that makes the difference. And people think, well, what am I going to do that's going to make a difference? I promise you, someone caring enough to reach out makes the difference.
I think the real powerful message right now is, obviously we're all being awoken to the importance of human connection now that we've had it taken away from us. But I've often said that I believe many of us associate giving with a financial contribution, writing a check, putting some money into the Salvation Army Christmas bin. And those things are wonderful when you have the ability to do that. But I think, when people right now are seeking greater purpose in their life and more meaning, and really questioning in a lot of cases, and I know that was another one of the tips today, was just on, you might be busy, you might be, you might have had a full slate, but really, was it making you happy? Were you fulfilled? And I think one of the things that we can actually help people in what you're doing and what we're doing at Gen Well is that, or what we are doing in sharing this message, is actually letting people recognize that, as you say, sitting there and listening, we've always heard 2 ears, 1 mouth, and listening to somebody and not having to solve all the problems. Certainly my wife tells me that all the time. The key is, we can be there for each other. And the greatest gift that you can give is just in being there. And I think it's a powerful message.
Well, and I really believe, again, I know people are compassionate. We're terrified to do or say the wrong thing or to interfere, right? Oh, they've got, I don't want to be, and I just say, just call. And yes, and don't wait for it to be comfortable. It's not going to be comfortable. And that's okay. And if they don't want to talk, it will be a very short conversation. And if they don't want to pick up the phone, they won't. I just did this yesterday. A lovely woman in our community, her husband was killed on the highway. Again, it was just, he was on his way to a great weekend and he was killed on the highway. And I just I was devastated for her. I've known this couple for years, and I waited. It was 2 weeks ago. I waited a week and a half because I know, right? At first, I mean, everybody's there and people can't be there the same right now. I called her and it was uncomfortable. And I just said, hello, it's Yvonne. I am thinking about you every day. And I was very choked up. Why wouldn't I be sad? And we talked for 20 minutes. She has texted me. She sent me something that somebody wrote about her husband. Like there's that, she thanked me many text, and I mean, it's just, she said that meant so much to her. And that just chokes me up because, I mean, for me to make a phone call, I mean, it was nothing. It was nothing. Like, it didn't cost any money. It didn't take a lot of time. And it meant so much. So be uncomfortable and just show up anyway.
I think be uncomfortable and just show up anyway. I think that's a powerful message, Yvonne, because I think what you're speaking to, and I even want to push it further upstream a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I want to say, hey, what makes reaching out to one another much easier is when we're doing it before the crisis comes. If we had been reaching out to our friends, and if everybody reached out to, as we launched our campaign earlier this year called Just One More, if everybody took one more person to reach out to, and we could make a difference and maintain those relationships, then when the crisis comes, then there isn't that concern and that fear and that anxiety about reaching out. And even if you haven't had a chance to reach out recently, if you've spent some quality time along the way, then the relationship is there. And there is a study, I think it was at Harvard, that said that 90% of the time when people reach out to old friends, 90% of the time it ends up in a positive experience for both parties. Yeah. So we're all sitting there wanting human connection, but we're all fearful of that anxiety that you spoke of there. And it's like, ew. And I think that is it. Just do it. Just be there.
And here's the other part of that as well. We'll just keep going upstream. If you didn't just show up in the past, and maybe that's why you're avoiding, right? Because you're like, I'm a schmuck. I didn't call them when their dad died. I didn't. Yep. Yeah, I feel awful. So now I'm too embarrassed. So now I'm just going to keep piling that up. You know what? I just call and just say, you know what? I feel terrible about not being there for you when this happened. And I didn't want to do that again. And I'm here. And, if you hang up on me, I understand, but I just want you to know I care. And I'm sorry that I didn't just show up.
I think these conversations, we're not even, I think I'm still on the first question that I officially asked you on this. And I knew this was what was going to happen.
Yes.
But, that little snippet of, I don't know if you want to call it a tip, advice, a thought, to me, that's a powerful one for people to actually hear, to say, we all make mistakes. We all miss people's, funerals and deaths and other tragedies, a divorce, a job loss, I should have been there. I should have called you. I should have let you know. But hey, none of us are perfect. And there's a lot of people out there. And what we need to, I think, focus on is recognizing that we need to build those really powerful relationships and support networks by finding those people that really are the type of people that you want to build those strong relationships with, where you don't miss those opportunities, but understand that you can't do that for everybody and that you're going to miss. And, frankly, how do you follow the social media feeds when there's 500 or 1,000 people and, it's flowing through so fast, you can't even see what comes up. So in the old days, we would never have known, and therefore the guilt wouldn't have been there. Yeah. Now we actually see it 3 weeks later on social, and you go, oh my God, how did I miss that? So
yeah. And I'll tell you, when you talk about technology being our friend, I just realized that my little thing here matches my shirt. How cute is that? Anyway,
that is spectacular.
I mean, really, that's pretty awesome. Another good thing about technology that I'm grateful for is now what I do when something is really important, I think, oh my gosh, I want to call them in 2 weeks. I don't want to forget. I put reminders in my phone. And, when someone is grieving, had a crisis or feel isolated, Put a reminder in your phone. Check on Joe every 3 weeks. Boom. Repeat every 3 weeks.
What
Check
a
on Joe.
beautiful, beautiful piece of
Make
advice.
it easy for yourself. Use
Yeah.
technology for, like you said, these beautiful purposes, meaningful connection,
Yeah.
especially until we can get together and hug on each other.
And whether it's somebody who's grieving, whether it's somebody, maybe it's a senior, maybe it's a young person who isn't getting a chance to connect with his community the way we once did, and we will get back to eventually. But what a brilliant idea! Put it in your calendar, just the weekly outreach or whatever. That's a great one. Okay, so let's get back to you, and more specifically to grief. And so you went from the transition and you went to write your book, and you're on your way. But I'm just curious, how was it grief that you landed on? Like, how did you actually define grief as, you're seeing people suffering through the journey with their kids and with loved ones and death? And I guess grief, grief is what it is, but how did you articulate that? How did you find that in all those experiences?
Well, it's so interesting because so many of us feel like grief is what we experience at end of life, when someone's dying and you're sad and everything. And I kept reading, and it's like there's different schools of thought. And when you see somebody who is grieving, but they're really angry, right? They're rah, rah, rah. They're angry at everyone, and they're irritable, and they're not sleeping. And the person over here is so distracted. And I remember one lady I interviewed for my book. She said, she had talk about tremendous grief. One son who died by suicide, and her other son died of cancer 10 years later. I mean, excruciating. And she said, everyone kept waiting for me to cry. And I didn't cry, but I couldn't get off my couch. It was, and other people told me their bodies ached. And the word grief, I realize, and this is how I define grief, is our mental, physical, and emotional reaction to loss, transitions, and change. And I feel like it's a word that I want everyone to understand in the broader sense. Divorce, diagnosis, job loss, mental health issues, being isolated from your friends, you're grieving. And it kind of gives someone, oh, I understand now, like, I'm grieving. I've taught this to my children. I mean, our twins were 9 when I was writing my book. They know more about grief, death, and dying than any adult I know, because we don't shelter them from any conversation. And I just remember my great moment when they came home and they had a friend on the bus. It was like, whatever, Mark was really angry on the bus, and he was really agitated or irritable, whatever word they used. And I said, that's frustrating for sure. So what do you think could be going on? I said, I know, Mom, he could be grieving something, right? He could be grieving something. Maybe his family, maybe didn't eat. Maybe his family is whatever, in turmoil. I feel like it's just a word we need to understand more, and understand that there's so many emotions that we can experience within it. And to me, helping people to understand there's no timeline, and it doesn't, somebody's whose cat died, and you're thinking, what's their deal? Like, they can't even function. They're grieving so much. Well, that cat could have meant everything to them. So we can't judge grief. We all have different experiences with grief. And I feel like it helps us to understand. And also the big thing is feeling is healing. Acknowledge and allow your grief, acknowledge and allow other people's, and you see, ooh, gosh, I'm getting this aha moment. Pete, here it is. Grief is truly a huge barrier for human connection, because we are so ill prepared for grief. Personally, when we see someone crying, angry, whatever, and they're grieving, you're like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. I'm not good with grief. I'm certainly not going to go connect with them. Whereas the truth is, if you went to that person and said, Joe, looks like you're struggling right now. I don't know what to say, but I'm here. And tell me what's going on. If you want to tell me, so if we understood grief and sort of befriended it like this, but just, we don't have to like it, but if we accepted that it is a part of this journey, and when we just show up for each other and acknowledge it, and allow it, and we don't judge it, we can truly connect at such a beautiful level, and people can move through it with greater ease.
I will say that you've actually even brought something up in me. I lost my dad when I was 13 years old, and I don't think I grieved it. And I didn't talk about it till I was probably 30 something.
Wow.
And you know what? It's only actually as you were speaking there that it kind of came up that, I know that the next day, for example, a friend of mine came over, and I remember him saying, "Hey, I heard," because I never told anybody. And I remember him saying, I heard about your dad. And I was like, yep. And then we went and shot hoops and never talked. And certainly I'm much more conscious now about human connection, obviously. But, unless you recognize the power of conversation and of human connection, then you're less likely to actually buy into it, because you just don't recognize that really what you need, to your point, to get off that couch, to have that conversation, might just be that knowledge that, hey, just that conversation, I know it might feel a little uneasy, and it doesn't need to be, long or in depth. It could just be like, hey, how's your day going? What's going on? And it's just having that ear. So, Yeah.
But where do we talk about this before? Right? We don't talk about grief before it arrives. We don't help people with coping skills and strategies and helping them to understand you grieve throughout life. And when you just show up for each other and allow the feelings, that there is no right or wrong way to grieve, only what's right or wrong for you. And I always say, unless you're hurting yourself or someone else. And the good news, and again, let's eliminate that barrier so you can connect in a meaningful way. It's not your job to fix it. You can't fix grief. How you fix it is by allowing it. You can love and support them with no attachment, right? Like people say, well, what if they don't want me there? That's okay. No attachment. Lead with your heart and just show up.
I love it. Hey, so let me ask you this question. And what I really love about your message, Yvonne, is that it isn't just about an end of life death. Mm-hmm. And for me on the Gen Well project, our message is, hey, we're going to go through ups and downs throughout the course of our life. And by grieving and having the tools to help you through it, you'll avoid some of the bigger crises like a mental or physical health crisis in your own life, because you cope with it in the moment, because you have the tool set to actually deal with it. So first off, I thank you for seeing grief on a much broader perspective. But I want to ask you the question, grieving during a pandemic, we've all heard the stories of the drive-by funerals and the birthday parties. Although it's not, I'm just talking about celebrations. Mm-hmm. What do you think? Has COVID increased our awareness about grieving? Has it, whether it's a job loss, financial pressure, what has COVID done to the awareness, the consciousness of grieving, and maybe how we cope with it?
That's a
big one.
Yeah, it is a big one. And truly one of the biggest messages, kind of like you, I said, my gosh, when I wanted people to help people prepare for grief and navigate it before it arrived, I didn't know a pandemic was coming. So we have this umbrella of global grief. And then there's the whole, systemic racism since the murder of George Floyd just added this other layer of grief. And then we have all the other, I feel like what the pandemic has done is it is inadvertently forcing us to look at our own skills or lack of skills, and how we need to do things differently or suffer excessively. And there are a lot of people suffering excessively, being stuck. And there are a lot of people now, and I'm grateful, having meaningful conversations and having those conversations say, I am a mess today. And I'm saying, good for you for let's talk about it. Oh my God, I was a hot mess yesterday. And that whole allowing our humanness, even, there's been kind of this hierarchy, like CEOs, and you mentioned it the last time when you were on my show, like how CEOs are talking about isolation and loneliness. And we we feel like, oh, they should be okay. Or healthcare professionals, oh, they should be okay. Those who work in mental health. I'm working with a wonderful team of healthcare professionals who work in mental health right now. And, I know that they're exhausted, and they're realizing that you have personal and professional grief. And I know they've got their pens out and they're wondering how they can better support their clients. And I'm like, I want to talk about supporting you. And it's kind of like, oh, yeah. So I think people are waking up to the fact that, like, a lot of people were saying, oh, I just want to get back to normal. And I'm like, oh my gosh, no, hard no on that. I am aspiring for so much better, because I say, when you stop and think, how were we doing? 1 in 3 mental health issues, suicide rates, opioid overdose. Come on, we can do better. And I think this has been just a tremendous wake up call. Kind of like, I feel like when I hit that rock bottom and, our issues with Tyler and addictions 10 years ago, it's like, if I don't do something differently, we're going to stay here. So I feel like the grief that people are experiencing is a catalyst. And I want to remind everyone, what we're going through is temporary, and you never know what awaits on the other side of grief. Yeah. And I believe there's something so much better.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. Do we go back to the old ways, or do we, embrace what we're experiencing now? And I think there's for some, the shift is going to be easy, and for some, the shift is going to be extremely difficult. And it's really a psychological shift, because if you can get your head into the right space of, hey, maybe running around 18 hours a day from meeting to meeting to event to dropping my kids off, not spending time with them, but having somebody else take care of them. Yeah. Maybe that actually wasn't what I was put on this planet for. Maybe that wasn't so fulfilling after all. And maybe the making time to have human connection, to build my coping strategies and strength, maybe that is the solution.
Well, it is.
Yeah, and now let's get in. We've got about 5 minutes left, and what I really want to get into is the "I just showed up" movement. And part of the reason I want to get into that is because I was inspired listening to your podcast this morning. And so I want to talk about the movement, what inspired the movement coming out of, Love Your Life to Death. Why this movement? And then what I'd love to finish off is, let's highlight some of those great tips that you had this morning, if you can remember them, because I've got them here if you can't.
Yeah, I didn't remember.
And so where did the movement come from, coming out of the book? And I'm assuming it came after the book.
It did, yes. And I love this question, because the Love Your Life, everything has sort of just, I get anxious in my home and I start to pace. That's why I knew I needed to do something different. And the book was born, and it was Love Your Life to Death. And I shared people's stories ages 11 to 101. And I loved it. And I feel like every adult, it's an ebook, audiobook. I feel like every adult in the world should read this book. And then it is more about life, grief, end of life, and talking about other grief, but mostly. And then I realized, here's the thing. With all of our generations, it's a lot of damage control. People are, set in their ways. They're only going to shift so much. If they choose to, they can shift more. I want to create social change with our young people, so that they grow up and don't end up in this place where they don't know how to connect. They don't know how to grieve. They don't, they're ill prepared for life, grief, end of life. I need children. And, and again, it was the pacing. People are so scared to connect with people when they're grieving. And we just, and I was pacing around. I said, we just need to just show up for each other. And then I went, oh my gosh.
That's right? It.
There it is. And so I said, what I want to be able to say is, I just showed up. And so instead of saying to people, just show up, I wanted it to be like my bracelet. I just showed up. I just showed up. So when people wear their bracelet, like, you know what? Somebody was having a hard time. I brought them a coffee. It meant something to them. I just showed up, so that people would say, oh, I just showed up. What does that mean? And it comes with a little card. And the biggest thing is that if you want to be able to just show up for others, you must, like you said, the oxygen, just show up for yourself first.
Yeah.
It's just non-negotiable. So like the little card that it comes with, and I'd be happy to send anybody a bracelet, because you need a bracelet. You certainly
I need a bracelet.
Yeah, you do.
I want to show up for you.
Well, you certainly have. And this reminds you, wear this bracelet as a reminder to just show up for yourself first. Be the best version of you. Wear because you just showed up for someone. You can make a difference. And give to someone who just showed up for you, to say thank you. And so I want to see millions of people. And this is, I've taught this concept to 4-year-olds. They get it.
Mm-hmm.
We had when my cousins, triplets +1, 4 daughters, long story. Anyways, when they were 5, and I just said to them, they all had their little bracelets. I just showed up. And I say, how did you just show up? There was a girl at school and she was sad, so I sat beside her. There was a new girl at school, so I let her meet my friends. And I said, you just showed up. My mom was crying when my papa died, so I sat with her. And I'm like, oh, you just showed up. Right? Children get it. So imagine if we created this cultural change where children understood this human connection and how to just show up. They wouldn't be as big a mess as we are.
Yeah. Hey, we're all born with empathy and compassion for one another, and I think we've done a great job at beating it out of people over the last few decades. So, I was on an interview a few weeks back, and the gentleman asked me, what would I change, and what I said is I'd like to go back 40 years. And in the education system, teach people about the importance of human connection, because I think that would in itself have changed, the way we've treated one another over the last few decades as we lived in the greatest growth era in the history of the world. So,
absolutely.
All right, let's start wrapping up here. So the last question we ask everybody, Yvonne, is, and you actually, I think you've already given the answer off the top, which is, when this is over, when we can get back to the new normal, let's assume there's some connection within that, some human connection. What's the way? How are you going to celebrate the end of COVID and the launch of the new normal?
Oh my gosh, very simply, I will be just showing up everywhere I can with in-person random acts of kindness and random acts of hugness. I will be hugging strangers. I will ask first. I will be hugging everyone and just celebrating that connection. I will be that kooky lady walking down the road going, I'm so happy to see you. Hello, without a mask. Oh my goodness, what a nice smile. I will be complimenting. It will be ridiculous. I will be ridiculous, and I can't wait.
I think you'll be beautiful, and I look forward to not only hearing your stories when that time comes, but let's fill up. In the GenWell, we're working on something in regards to, our GenWell weekends are all about inspiring human connection, but we're working on something for the end of COVID, and it really is about inspiring us all to be Yvonne, to actually say, look, I went through being lonely, disconnected, and isolated, and what I know is I don't like it. And so, maybe the 50% of Canadians who don't know their neighbor's name will actually knock on the door. Maybe when we pass somebody, right now we're living in fear and we're going to the other side of the street, but maybe we'll stop for a second and say hello and how's your day? And maybe the silver lining of this whole thing will be, we'll all just show up for people, in everything that we do, in every day that we live, because that is what people will remember when they lie on their deathbed. It won't be the money. It won't be the cars. It won't be the house. It won't be the toys. It'll be, who'd you show up for? And I think that's such a beautiful movement, Yvonne. And I'm a big supporter of I Just Showed Up. And I can't wait to spread your message, our message, and together we will make the world a happier and healthier place by getting people more connected and getting them to show up.
Well, Pete, I have to say that the Genwell Project and all the passion that you bring and the humanness and the connection, I am so grateful. And yeah, we're in this together now. You're kind of stuck with me because I'm crazy about everything that you're doing as well. So thank you for just showing up for the world with your beautiful message.
You're very welcome, and thank you for those kind words. Okay, so if people want to know more about you, about where they can get the book, Love Your Life to Death, how they could become part of the movement, the I Just Showed Up movement, where do they go? How do they find you?
Very easy. Just go to the website, loveyourlifetodeath.com. It's all there.
All right. Well, Yvonne, I just want to say thank you for an incredible conversation. And again, for what you do and the passion that you bring to Love Your Life to Death and the I Just Showed Up movement, because I think it is people like you that are going to help us awaken to and be more conscious about the need for us to be there for each other. And especially as we start to recognize that grief isn't only at end of life, that grief happens all through life. And every time we see it and hear it in somebody else, that we can remember that just by showing up, that we can make a difference in somebody's life. So my friend, have an amazing day.
Thank you, my friend.
And thank you. Hey, thank you for showing up for this interview.
Well done. Thank
All right.
you, Pete. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
We'll talk to you soon.